Ball Podcast. I'm your host, Colby Conway at Colby R. Conway. Right over here, this guy, Matt Selz at the Selz Man. So, Matt, we've had no baseball for a couple of days. Have you been able to pass the time okay? I know I'm enjoying the break personally, but I am ready to get some MLB action back on the screen in games that actually matter and not mini games or basically exhibitions.
Yeah, so did some gardening yesterday. Planted I don't know, 9 plants yesterday. I got no, sorry, more than that. I don't know. We did a lot of gardening around the front of our house. We're getting it in shape, doing some stuff that we've wanted to do for a little bit. Watched the home run derby. That was pretty impressive, especially watching Adley Rutschman go switch hitter, and then unfortunately getting knocked out with ease by Luis Robert, who was just bombing 480-foot homers. Um, and then watched a little bit of the All Star game. I don't know. I was for some reason less intrigued by this year's All Star game. I don't fully know why. I do wish they would go back to letting them wear their actual unis instead of these god awful Great Britain designed AL and NL jerseys. But yeah, I'm ready for some baseball to come back that actually matters.
I enjoyed the home run derby. I think every year I just enjoy it. It's always fun to watch. Like it is what it is at this point. I enjoyed it. Where did you stand on within the All Star game with them having the players mic'd up and talking to them? Are you a fan of that or anti miking up the players during the game?
I thought it was cool. I mean, we do it. There's other guys that are mic'd up. Um, football, yeah, sure, you don't necessarily hear about it mid game, but we do have access to it. Obviously, I cover NASCAR and F1, and driver radios are a thing that you listen to throughout the weekend to find out how the car is going, who thinks of what during the race, what their strategy is going to be. So I thought it was kind of cool. Plus, got a little tidbit, and now I'm even more convinced that Juan Soto is coming back to the Nats because David Ortiz is apparently moving next door to Juan Soto. And so I think he's going to give him pointers about how to be a DH. So when he goes back to DC, he can DH, and then we can still have Dylan Cruz and James Wood, Robert Hassel III, Elijah Green, maybe Victor Robles, maybe Lane Thomas, in the outfield mix. So I liked it. I thought it was interesting to hear during an at bat, and more power to him to be able to talk and think and process about hitting a baseball at the same time.
I liked it. I thought it was the banter between like Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman. I thought was cool. You know, their teammates, yada yada yada. I really liked when Eovaldi was mic'd up because
Yeah.
hearing him talk about it and like talking to the announcer, like Cutter, Splitter, what do you think here? Just talking, you could like hear that process. And then it was cool too as a former catcher for him to like talk about what he wanted. And then he'd be like, all right, let's see what I don't remember if he said Jonah or if he said Heim. I don't remember what he said, but
Right.
basically, let's see what the catcher thinks. And he was like, yep. And they were basically like on the same page, which I thought was really cool. I didn't love when Eovaldi was mic'd up and Corbin Carroll was mic'd up going against each other because now we lost that insight because Eovaldi wasn't going to say what he was going to throw. It was
Right,
cool for
because
them to
they had open
talk.
mics. So yeah.
Yeah. I think in that moment, and it was those two don't know each other all that well. So we had like, like the congratulations and the all the like formalities. I think if they're gonna mic up a pitcher and a hitter, if they can do it, I think it would be really cool for two that had a rapport, whether they were like former teammates or something like that. Cause then there could be a little trash talk, a little, it's not like two guys basically getting to know each other. It's two guys that have already faced each other. They know
Right.
each other. Like you get some inside jokes that may come up. Like I think that would have been really cool. My favorite part of the mic'd up was hearing Eovaldi's thought process while pitching.
Right. Or you do it where only one of them is an open mic at a time. So like you
Mm.
start with the pitcher, he sets up the first pitch, right? Then based on the result, you shut off Eovaldi's mic, and then you open Corbin Carroll's, and he says, "Okay, so I got a fastball here. It was here. I'm thinking he's going to do this now." That pitch happens. You shut off that mic, and then you go to Eovaldi. Okay, now we're in a 1-1 or an 0-2 or a 2-0 count. Here's how I'm attacking. That would be cool. But yeah, simultaneous doesn't because you're not going to get any insight. You're just going to get two dudes who are congratulating each other about being all stars.
Yeah. And like you said, too, big shout out to Eovaldi for being able, because you could tell in the beginning when he was mic'd up, he was trying to focus on what he was doing, and then he was like, "Oh, I don't know if I'm talking enough," and then he started talking a little bit more, but you could tell like he was definitely like focused on it. So I think it was really cool.
Yeah.
I like that in part. I would enjoy that
I want
during
more
the
ump
All-Star game.
cam, by the way. They've
Yeah,
done it sparingly this year, but I want more ump cam
yeah.
because
I
you get
agree.
a real feel for exactly how hard it is to hit some of these pitches.
And also, I'm not going to harp on this too much longer because I want to get into our next segment here. But for the love of God, can we stop putting kids in the outfield?
Didn't one of them like need
Yes.
medical attention?
Yes. He took a 107-mile-an-hour line drive from
Yeah.
Vladdy straight to the I believe it was above their right eye or forehead or something. This was a matter of time. They
I
skated by
mean,
all these past years without it. Like
well,
it's
no,
done.
no. The clip of Pete Alonso dancing during the home run derby a couple years ago immediately preceded by medical attention being served to a kid who missed one of his bombs and was getting walked off like all the way around the outfield to the and he was
And
sitting there just dancing and
And
it did not
especially
look good.
this year too, with them just not like in past years, they had to wait till either the ball was on its way down or it had landed. And this year it was like, screw it, we're going rapid fire. The second it hits the bat, the next pitch can come, is basically what it seemed like. If they're going
Yeah,
to do that, you got to take the kids out. Because I mean, think about it. They're out there, they're enamored by the ball. What are they going to do? If ball's hit, it's like a dog fetching a ball, right? Eyes right to it, nothing else around even matters. That
right.
next ball's coming. Just they don't put them out there next year. It's
Nope.
cool. It's
They don't
fun.
have their head
I
on a
get it.
swivel.
Or you know what? If you want to put him out there, cool. When a righty's up, stick him in right field. Let him stand there because you
Yep.
know what? They may get
Or
one
center.
or center, but don't even put them on the
Yeah.
pool side. But anyway, I digress. We know more of that. But Matt, second edition of the week. You know it's coming up. It is Down on the Farm with Matt Selz at the Selzman on Twitter and over at Fantasy Alarm. Everybody was waiting for it. The newspaper boy came around, handed it out. Newspaper boy or girl, I should say. The new prospect rankings
I
at
was a newspaper boy when I was a kid. That was one of my
okay.
jobs.
See,
6
there.
cents a paper, delivered 311 papers a week.
Oof. Well, I mean, hey, you got to do what you got to do, right? But the new prospect rankings are out over at fantasyalarm.com. Top 400, updated team ranks, updated prospects in the top 400 team positional. It is all there over at fantasyalarm.com. And of course, you can get a free 7-day trial right now that will give you the prospect rankings and everything you need there, as well as the Fantasy Alarm Fantasy Football Draft Guide. So you get a free 7-day trial. Just head over to fantasyalarm.com. Get yourself signed up there. But Matt, I was diving into this. I was interested to see where a couple of guys would come. And looking at it, let's just talk about the first two picks in the draft. Dylan Cruz slots in at number 8 overall for you, also the 8th hitter. And Paul Skeens becomes your number 1 pitching prospect in baseball. So talk to me about how you decide to put these two where they were, and then more specifically about Skeens of the Pittsburgh Pirates, not the Washington Nationals, why he has now become your top pitching prospect overall.
So we'll start with Skeens being the top pitcher. There's been a lot of turnover in pitching prospects recently, but there's also been some question marks and some injuries. So, you know, Ricky Tiedemann was looking like he'd be on the verge of being the top prospect, and he's been a little iffy. You've got the couple guys from the Phillies, Andrew Painter most specifically, who's injured. Right, we don't have a timeline for him right now, so you can't really put them there. And Paul Skeens comes in. He is very good. He is the best pitching prospect to be in the draft since probably Steven Strasburg. And yes, the last half of Strasburg's career has been bad, but when he was healthy, he was immense on the field. We all remember his debut. So there's a little bit of iffiness in pitching, right? Bobby Miller has shot way up my rankings. He's in the top 20 now. But again, I think Skeens has a higher upside uh, than Bobby Miller. So, in terms of that, reasoning, it was fairly clear to me that Skeens would be the top pitching prospect. But you can't discount any of the hitters that are ahead of him because they're going to affect the game a max of 162 times in a season, whereas Skeens is going to do it about 33 times, right? Because it's just the nature of starters versus hitters. So, and then in terms of Dylan Cruz, I can't really slot him any higher than eighth. Kyle Manzardo. So the guys I have ahead of him, Jackson Holiday is my new number one, which, by the way, makes 3 O's that have been number one in my last 4 prospect rankings. So we had Adley was 1, Gunnar was 1, then you had Corbin Carroll at 1, and now Jackson Holiday is number 1 overall. Junior Caminero is 2 for me. James Wood is 3. Jackson Churio 4. Jordan Lawler, 5. Evan Carter 6. Kyle Manzardo 7, and then you get to Dylan Cruz. So to me, all of those guys have proven their abilities throughout the minor leagues at this point, right? Jackson Holiday is on a fast pace. He may be up next year, to be perfectly honest. Dylan Cruz, as polished as he is coming out of college, still has to prove that he can do it in the pro ranks, right? So I put him at 8. That's how I came down on it. Wyatt Langford is the next guy from the draft. He could have gone ahead of Skeens, but I feel like the upside of a premier starter is still a little better than Langford's tools.
Fair enough. I can get behind that. Now, one thing also, when I was looking through the prospect rankings that you have here, looking through some of the guys. So, like, obviously from this draft class, Dylan Cruz comes in at number 8. We see Paul Skeens at number 12, Wyatt Langford at 14, Max Clark at 29, Walker Jenkins at 35. Those were the top 5 picks in the draft.
Correct.
Maybe not in that exact order, but, pretty darn close for the most part. So then I was interested. So I was like, well, does Matt continue the trend? Is it now the 6th pick? Do we see his beloved Noble Meyer as the next guy that comes in there? And instead, we see at number 40, St. Louis outfielder Chase Davis, who, if I'm not mistaken, was the 21st pick. So you have, of your prospects, you have basically, in not the exact order, but the top 5 picks is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now it's the guy who was drafted 21st is your 6th highest prospect in this class. So talk about, I know in our last edition, if you haven't heard that, go check it out. But you were very complimentary of the pick, obviously, and that is shown and corroborated here. But just talk about your evaluation on Chase Davis and why you really have him up there pretty darn high, all things considered.
So he has one of the sweetest swings in the draft class. He was a very polished college hitter in a very good college baseball conference. The Pac-12 is a pretty good conference. And it really, so for those of you who read my, draft primer, and I broke it down by my favorite not top 5 hitter or top 5 player who I hadn't mentioned, I mentioned Aiden Miller as my favorite guy. Aiden Miller is after Chase Davis, after Noble Meyer, and then it's Aiden Miller. Why is Aiden Miller now behind Chase Davis? It's simply the system that he went to. St. Louis has a very good history of developing players. So you have to give a bump there, and you can't just go based off of when they were drafted, which, by the way, Chase Davis was drafted before Aiden Miller. You can't just go based off of your before the draft, because if you'll notice, Chase Dollander is way down in the rankings. The guy the A's picked is like 377th in the rankings, Jacob Wilson. So yeah, it basically came down to the fact that I like the way that St. Louis develops guys more than I like the way that the Phillies develop guys.
Yeah. So, okay, you stole a little bit of my lust because I was going to talk about Dollander next because of where he's ranked. So, how do you evaluate and take everything into play? Because obviously, like in this week's, excuse me, in the updated prospect rankings, you even talk about the fact that Dollander gets a big knock for going to Colorado, despite the fact that he was pretty much a consensus top 3 arm in the class. So, how do you go about evaluating talent and like the landing spot? Like how does your brain work when you're kind of going through this entire process, and how just how much do you put into the landing spot?
For pitchers, I put a pretty decent amount into the landing spot. That's why Rhett Lauder, by the way, also slips outside of the top 100 for me because, well, I was also not as high on him as some others. I thought he was like kind of like a Nick Lodolo coming out, where he's like an innings eating, like mid rotation guy who's going to get some strikes, right? Um, but the Reds have shown that they can develop pitching pretty well and they can pitch pretty well in that ballpark. The Rockies have not shown that at all, right? Like we talked about this in the Monday edition when we analyzed the draft, that I said I like Chase Dolander's stuff. I think he'll be okay in Colorado, but in terms of a fantasy, the other thing is you have to keep in mind that I am ranking these prospects based on fantasy value, not based on baseball value. If that was the case, Jacob Wilson would be a lot higher than he is. But for fantasy value, Jacob Wilson, who the A's took at 6th overall and is a very solid player, same with Tommy Troy, who I also said is like a baseball player that the Diamondbacks took. They're high average middle infielders, but they don't do a whole lot in the counting stats department. And that doesn't get you anywhere in fantasy, right? So Chase Dolander may be the best Rockies pitching prospect they've had in a while. But is that saying a lot? Like, that's not the same thing as saying he's the best Braves pitching prospect, right? That's why Hurston Waldrop, who I also was iffy on coming into the draft, got a bump for me. He wound up in the one of the best landing spots a pitcher can wind up for, not only in terms of home park, but also development. Do you realize that AJ Smith-Shawver was drafted out of high school 2 years ago and already made the majors? So they have a very good history of taking guys with 2 pitches and a fringy third one and turning them into a high quality. I mean, nobody paid attention to Spencer Strider when they took him, and now people can't get enough of him, right? So it's for pitching specifically, I do factor a lot more development and home park than for hitters.
Let me just ask you as a quick question so we can move on to our first half fantasy baseball awards. This may not be a great example or a question per se, but let's say Colorado had the first pick and took Paul Skeens. Would he still be the number one pitching prospect for you? In that case, would talent win out?
Yeah.
Okay.
The other thing with Dolander is he wasn't as consistent this year, right? So you kind of got to knock that a little too. Mm-hmm. But Paul Skeens' talent is so immense that he would still be my, yeah, it'd be like 1A and 1B with Bobby Miller. But you'd knock him down a couple of spots, but I think he would still be my top pitching prospect.
Fair enough. And like I said, let's go ahead and give out our first half awards for the fantasy baseball season. We went a little chalky here with the first one. I have to admit it, maybe in terms of a production per. Yeah, for sure. I mean, sure, you could pick some value guy that came out of nowhere, but we have a different category for that. So, yep. Matt, let's talk first half fantasy MVP. I got into the document before you did, so I got the chalky one. How do you not give it to Ronald Acuna?
You can't. He went like 20-30 in the first half and has a shot at like 50-80.
If you simply double his numbers, which I know it's not a apples to oranges comparison, it's just not how it works. But
you
if
don't ever extrapolate. Yeah.
Correct. But if we were to simply just double,
yes,
40-80 season, 330 plus batting average, nearly 160 runs scored, and 110 RBI. I mean, he's pacing 40-80. That's my MVP.
I don't understand how that wouldn't be the best fantasy season of all time.
I think it would have to be. But
anyway. I mean, he would single-handedly win you every category.
He would be the
even if you didn't get any stats in the other ones, he would win you all of the other ones.
That is very true. Who is your chalky fantasy MVP?
Mine's got to be Shohei. Like, even if you're in a league where you can't use him in both spots, he's still an MVP as either a pitcher or a hitter. Granted, the pitching hasn't been as great this year as it was last year. Still good. He's still like a top 5 fantasy starter, so like can't knock that. And he's your major league leader in home runs. on a team where like literally no. I mean, I know he had Mike Trout, but that's basically the only thing, right? So I got to go with Shohei. You could get him as like the seventh guy off the board, and he's helping you across. You know, he could win a triple crown as a pitcher. He could win a triple crown as a hitter. Hard to argue against that one.
Absolutely. And then first half fantasy, whether you want to call it least valuable player
I
or
like LVP. I do.
yeah, LVP. That's like I think that's what the like wood flooring in like new
Or
houses they build now is
or we could
LVP, I
call
think.
it MVP because N comes after M, and then it could be no value player.
Very, very true there. I'll give you two arms. First one for me is Christian Javier. Where did the strikeouts go?
I don't know.
I mean, where'd the ERA go? The wins are fine. His win-loss record's going to be better. Shout out Astros for giving him some run support. But I mean, last year, K per nine of 11.7. This year, we're just barely above 8. Home
Yeah.
runs are up a little bit compared to last year. The strikeouts in the ERA are the problem because everyone was drafting him. He seemed like such a value in drafts, and it just hasn't quite been there this year. And then Sandy Alcantara, Sandy Alcantara, however you want to say it, it has not been good. Record's bad.
He's
Strikeouts
like
are
the only
down.
Marlins pitcher that's not producing.
I know. And this, I mean, win-loss record worse than last year. The
Yeah,
strikeouts
for a
down.
team that's like 21 games over 500 or something.
Yeah, strikeouts are down, walks are up, homers are up, ERA's through the roof. I mean, it's not good. Barrel rate's up against him, average exit velocity's up against him. His expected ERA is closer to his ERA, which is not good. It just Javier and Alcantara have been the two for me that just there were very many drafts. I wouldn't be surprised. We could probably get a bunch of screenshots of people that took them as their SP1 and SP2. Yikes.
Yeah,
Hasn't been good through the first half.
not a good first half for either of those guys. Mine, I'm going to go on a guy that I was very high on this year, argued for him to be the number one overall pick, looking fairly stupid now. Thanks, Ronald Acuna. And this guy, Trey Turner, for me. If we're looking at NFBC ADP from January 1st to the day before opening day, which is March 29th, Trey Turner is neck and neck with Ronald Acuna Jr. in ADP. Right? They both have they were both number one overall picks. The worst you got them was 9th. Okay. So they're both in the same spot. But boy, have they had different seasons. Trey Turner's F4 ranks him as like the 8th or 9th best shortstop, let alone overall player so far in the first half. Like 10 homers, sure, he's got 19 steals, but a bunch of those didn't come till June. Same with the homers. His batting average is like 247, not great. Yeah, I mean he started to figure it out a little bit in June, but the first 2 months, man, I thought this guy was going to be the park fit him perfectly. He got his batting coach, his hitting coach back that he loves, Kevin Long. He was in a stacked Phillies lineup. Not like the Dodgers weren't bad, but like you're talking about a guy who left LA in a homer-friendly park in a stacked lineup and went to Philly, which is a homer-friendly park and a stacked lineup with his hitting coach and got worse. So that sucks. My other guy, I'm going to go with a pitcher, Alek Manoah. I don't know, like, and then he had a rehab start in single A and got lit up, like gave up 10 earned in like 2/3 of an inning against A ball. So that's not great. You were drafting that guy to be at worst an SP2, and he's been not even startable. So,
yeah, a couple of SP, well, in Alcantara's case, SP1, but Javier Manoah SP2s. Not so great here through the first half. So, Matt, best waiver wire pickup. I stole yours. For me, it's Tyler Wells using the same ADP parameters that you put earlier, January 1 to March 29, right before opening day. Average pick of 652, 225th pitcher off the board. Minimum pick was 325. So we're talking outside of the top 22 rounds of 15 team formats. And this year, he is now just winning games. He's striking out near a batter an inning. ERA is just a smidge above 3. xERA and the FIP, some of those peripheral numbers indicate he may have been a little bit lucky, but home runs have gotten a little bit to him this year. But overall, Tyler Wells has been phenomenal for anybody that picked him up. And honestly, there's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. He's in a good spot, good offense backing him. So he's my best waiver wire pickup. Whom is yours at a position that is near and dear to my heart, actually? So I'm very excited for this one.
Yeah, I can speak to how well I've loved Tyler Wells this year. I picked him up in my dynasty league. I have him as a freebie in my 18-team home league. Guy has been phenomenal. He's outpitched a guy I kept in Chris Bassett. So like he could have been another least valuable. But how do we not talk about Yainer Diaz and what he's doing? Like he's been phenomenally good. And in those same ADP parameters, he went off at 682, the 48th catcher off the board. Okay. His min pick was 340, which, by the way, in a 12-team league puts him in the 28th round. So for a guy that you're not taking out of your lineup to be the 48th catcher off the board, even if you're starting in a 2-catcher league, he's not even being drafted because you're not drafting more than 2 or 3 guys. So even in a 15-team 2-catcher league, he's still not coming off the board. So Yainer Diaz has been phenomenal. No, I couldn't put Jonah Heim because he was one of like the top 8 catchers off the board. So we'll go with Yainer Diaz, the other Texan catcher that's dominating.
And both of these guys could have been included in our biggest surprise from the first half, but I went ahead and said Spencer Steer. I like the power coming up from the minors, but my biggest surprise with him, he's tamed the strikeouts. The walk rate looks good, but mainly the speed. Where does this come from? 9 stolen bases, only caught stealing this year. They're letting him run. Spencer Steer stolen bases are one of the biggest surprises for me from the first half.
It's like
What
that
say
Dan
you?
Vogelbach
Yeah.
bigger bases
Yep.
commercial.
Yep.
Again, another guy I'm benefiting from. I have Spencer Steer, and I've fielded multiple trade questions about him. I'm not giving him up, people. Sorry. My biggest surprise, I'm going to go with Josiah Gray. He was an all-star. He pitched very well in his 1 inning in the all-star game. In terms of where he was coming off the board, his ADP was 411 as the 8th national off the board. He's been really, really quite good. I think we all expected this when the trade was made between the Dodgers and the Nats that Josiah Gray was a very good pitching prospect. But this turnaround from last year to this year, he's got a 3.41 ERA, almost a strikeout per inning. The walks are getting a little up there, but they're starting to figure it out. He's still got 6 wins on a team that's not really winning. So, for a guy that was a freebie, that's hard to complain about.
Absolutely. And then of course, we've had the All-Star break. Teams have had multiple days to figure out the rotations. And of course, no one knows what they're going to do for the weekend. So our weekend streamer, Matt and I combined for this one. Colby Allard, 33% owned on Fantrack, gets the White Sox slightly below league average overall this year with the 9th highest strikeout rate against lefties. Workload's a bit of an issue with Allard. Don't know pitch count as a starter. He's gotten to 71 and 73 in 2 starts this season. But Chicago doesn't walk. So hopefully he can get a little bit deeper into the game. 5 innings, 5 strikeouts, and a win is very doable against this White Sox team. But keep an eye out for the schedule.
It's in Atlanta where he has a 0 ERA in, granted, a very small sample size, but he's yet to allow an earned run at home.
And 8 strikeouts to 1 walk in those 4 2/3 innings in that start against Minnesota, his lone home start of the year. But that'll do it for us here for this week's edition. Make sure you get over to fantasyalarm.com. You can get a 7-day free trial that'll get you access to all the goodies that we got over at Fantasy Alarm, including Matt's updated top 400 prospect rankings, team rankings, everything with prospects, all of our content across all of sports, and of course, the Fantasy Alarm Fantasy Football Draft Guide, so you can be ready for those drafts that are upcoming. Give Matt Selz a follow on Twitter at The Selzman. I'm on Twitter at Colby R. Conway, and we will see you next week with the newest edition of the Fantasy Alarm Fantasy Baseball.